Welcome to Athletes, Entrepreneurs, the Alumni Journey. I'm Rob Finkelstein, founder and CEO of Alumni Direct, where we've created a platform for athletes and other alumni to network and connect with each other and tap into various resources in finance and health and career. And athletes transition out of sports is such a major issue today, whether it's from a health perspective, financial literacy. And we interview former college and professional athletes, and we talk about their transition out of sports into successful business leadership and entrepreneurship. So excited today to have Dr. Erik Korem on. How you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me, Rob.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. So his background is very interesting. He was a college football player at Texas A&M, and then he got into sports science and performance conditioning. And you know, we started talking about, he's been across the board. I mean, he was in college sports. He was in the NFL. He was telling me he's worked with Olympic gold medalists. So he's going to tell us all about that later on. But it's just that my head was kind of spinning. And then today, his big thing is from his entrepreneurial journey is he's the founder of AIM7, which he'll talk all about the app. But he's also, like me, he's a fellow podcaster, and he has the Blueprint podcast. And maybe we'll hear a little about that as well. So, Erik, I always like to talk about growing up playing sports. How did that shape you leading up into college?
Yeah. So as a kid, I was kind of marginalized. I was overweight, didn't have a whole lot of friends in my early elementary years. And, I always felt like the shell that people saw was different than who I was inside. And I started to realize that I was a decent athlete. And, I played baseball and then did karate. This is the 80s, right?
Yeah.
And so Karate Kid, everybody's doing karate. And then I always wanted to play football, but my parents were like, you can't play football till you're in sixth grade. And I see a lot of wisdom in that, like tackle football. Yeah. And when first time I put on those pads, I'll never forget, I was put on, everybody else been playing organized football. This is Texas. I'm in Dallas. And they took all the kids that didn't play organized football till sixth grade and they put us on one team. And we were probably the best athletes in the entire league. And I'll never forget, all the popular kids that used to make fun of me were on this one team called the Lions. We were the Eagles. And the first time I was able to physically put my hands on somebody and show them who I really was, it was kind of not hurt them, but be like, hey, I'm here. You're going to feel me. And if you're an athlete, you know what I'm talking about. And I walked away and I was like, I love this. And I always kind of had this desire just to get better. And even into my early high school days, there wasn't a lot of training resources online. And I was buying books and buying videotapes like Husker Power, which was one of the first strength conditioning programs. I read which is a seminal book by Dr. Bob Ward called Sport Speed. And I'm out doing this stuff on tracks. And so I really fell in love with the process of becoming better. And when I got to Texas A&M, I was a pre-med major, but our weight room is very interesting at the time, was connected to a physiology lab. And it was, this is the Huffines Institute of Sports Physical Education, it was a massive weight room for back then. I mean, even today it would be huge. And there was a physiology lab attached to it. And I saw all this people kind of going back and forth, and they got these masks on, and they're doing VO2 max testing. I'm like, what the heck is going on here? And our strength coach, who has had a tremendous impact on my life, and he's now the director of player performance for the Detroit Lions, led by a bunch of other Aggies, which is pretty cool. Dan Campbell and Aaron Glenn and those guys. He was like, Erik, there's a science to training athletes. And I was bit by the bug, and I was all in, after that. And so, yeah, it was kind of this interesting transition, but I can really look back and see the roots were kind of in how I grew up as a kid and my desire to always be better, always be better, always be better, and kind of this struggle with identity. So training became more about who I am than really the sports itself.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's the life lessons of, I was thinking back to another podcast I had, and one of the guy was talking about how the first time he played football, one of the first times he played football, he suits up and I forgot, I think maybe he was, I don't know if he was like sixth grade, eighth grade, whatever it was. But basically he said that I think he was like the fullback or the tight end or something like that. So he gets the ball and these two huge guys just come through and just bury him into the ground. And he said he got face into the ground. The mask was all bent out of shape, the face, he's got gravel all in him. But he said that after that happened, he said that will never happen again. and it really shaped his life. I mean, he just talked about his, like, throughout his life and his business career and all that. The guy became super successful, and he just talked about how that moment just changed things. So it's just interesting when you start talking about putting on the pads for that first time. I could relate to that too. I mean, I played different sports, and I was okay. I wasn't anything special, but it's kind of that proving wrong too sometimes, like thing, because I was a runner. And it was interesting. I ran in high school and college, but towards the end of my high school, like, the runners were always looked down on, at least back when I was in high school, and the distance runners. But by the end of our senior year, our team was like a championship team. And so all of a sudden, like, the respect that we got from the football players, the baseball players, and soccer players, it totally, it changed, because, we kind of showed, hey, we got something here too.
For sure. For sure.
Yeah, kind of cool. Let's talk about so getting to college, and this whole show, I talk about transition out of sports. So when you were at Texas A&M, was there any kind of education on, not just like the 1-day workshop, but like what's next for athletes when they're done with sports?
I honestly don't remember anything that I went through personally. Now, this is 2003. I'm sure there was something, but like, these academic departments weren't nearly as robust as they are now. It was more about, like, we had the Aggie network, so we always knew we could tap into the Aggie network. But I don't remember having like formal guidance. Most of that guidance came from, quite honestly, talking to my head strength coach and saying, what do I need to do next? And he was like, you need to get a graduate assistantship. I'm like, okay, how do I do? First of all, I had to get an internship.
Yeah.
So he was like, here, he goes, here are the 15 schools that I know the head strength coach very well. I want you to call them and see if they'll give you an internship. And the first one, no kidding, was Arkansas. Picked up the phone, called Don Decker. I said, hey, Coach Decker, my name's Erik Korem. I'm a football player at Texas A&M. Mike Clark, our head strength coach, said that I could call you. I'm looking for an internship. He said, yep, show up this date. And that was it. And literally packed my, as soon as I graduated, packed my bags, moved into somebody's basement in Arkansas. And that's a whole nother story, and started my internship, and then got a graduate assistantship after that, and then just kind of figured it out.
Yeah, and I think that it's great, hearing that, because I think you bring up, and we're going to talk a little more in a bit about networking, connecting, but that's like just a perfect example. Here you are, you're looking for some help getting that internship. Your strength and conditioning coach hooks you up with that other through his network, and that's kind of what started your whole career, so to speak. I guess, like, just getting into that space, which is fantastic. So, and back to the transition out of sport, like you said, you went back in 2003. I was even earlier. I was in the late 80s, but I think things have changed now. I mean, I think schools are trying to make more of an effort, but still
Oh,
not
yes.
enough.
I mean, I'm talking to Texas A&M right now. A former teammate of mine, Chris Valletta, who started Mission, which was the skincare and clothing company that just blew up. I think they did over 400 million in revenue.
Wow.
During the COVID period. But Chris exited and to private equity. But anyways, he and I recently ran into each other at a Texas A&M football game, Aggie Network. And he started something called Amplify U, where they partner with the business school and they actually work with the student athletes to start have a class, like an actual course you can take. So now they have me wanting to come back. They have me coming back in January to talk about some of these things that we're talking about right now. So I know they're doing a great job of like actually putting this in action, giving student athletes an opportunity to earn credit in the process of this. So things have, and I'm sure there's opportunities like this at a bunch of different schools, maybe not an actual course you can get 3 hours of credit
Right.
for, but at least programs. So things have radically different from what they were to now.
And that's great. And that's what we're, like, we're trying to even enhance that. We're looking at going into, some athletic, programs, and trying to develop additional curriculum workshops, through resource partners in various things, financial literacy and health and, career service. It could be, networking, connecting, like from a sales perspective. But I think it's so important, and it's great that they're, Texas A&M is doing that now. Sounds like a really interesting program, and we'll talk a little more about that later offline. But so let's kind of switch gears. So I brought up, and you kind of alluded to it with this whole, networking, connecting. It's really important, obviously, and talk about the importance of doing it while you're still playing.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to say this, but there's something called leverage. And when you're an athlete, at the prime time of like when people know who you are, you kind of have a little bit of leverage, so to speak, or you have exposure. Maybe that's another way of putting it. And during those times, you need to take advantage of that. You don't want to be lazy about, oh, well, things are just going to happen. They're not going to happen. You got to make it happen. And if you can go out there and start finding out, like, who are the alumni in my network that have certain businesses or internships available, and make yourself known to them, they're going to be very excited to engage with you. And so I think I think it's absolutely critical to be developing a network. I mean, now, like, we didn't have social networks when I was in college, but now, like, we
Right.
got LinkedIn and Facebook, and it's all networking. And I will be honest, there's nothing worse than my LinkedIn inbox. It's so spamified, right? Like, you get all this
Yeah.
crappy inbound. Now, if it's somebody that is from your college network, or you're like, hey, I'm a student athlete, Texas A&M or University of Miami or wherever, I saw that you're also, in the same network. Can we connect? Or we're using your software tool. That's like how it should be done. Or reaching out to your department and saying, who can I get an internship with? Maybe even it's a micro internship, or maybe you can't go on premise. What could I be doing? Maybe it's something where it's an asynchronous internship where you're doing work. I think it just gets you more exposure, so that when your career ends, and it's going to end for everybody, that you at least have some connections that you've been fostering and work and developing over the years.
Yeah, and it's so true, and I bring this up a lot on my podcast, but yeah, I've talked to agents before, and they say kind of the biggest failure they see is athletes not networking while they're still playing. And to your point, that you brought up, is just that you're relevant, and people know you at the time, and so what happens is they've kind of got their blinders on, and they get done with their sports career, and then all of a sudden they're just expecting, okay, well, I'm going to get this land the 6-figure job or whatever, and they don't, and the reason why is they haven't built those relationships and built that network that they could have been doing along the way. And I think it's the education side of things. I mean, I've talked to some younger college athletes, freshman, sophomore, that say, well, I wish I would have learned that back in high school, which I truly believe. You've got your teammates, you got their friends, their families, their parents, coaches, that it can really make an impact. So we definitely always encourage people to network and connect, and do that as soon as you can.
For sure.
So let's talk about, you brought it up there, alumni engagement. And, I think it's really important. Are there, back when you were there, or maybe even today, because it could be both sides. So like, was there a move to bring back alumni athletes, to not just for the golf tournaments and all that, but more so to work with the athletes in the current program?
I couldn't remember it, to be honest. Like, not that I remember. I knew of the Aggie greats. I would see those guys come to practice, and you can interface with them, but I never really, things have changed a lot. Let's just say that, like, significantly. You knew who those folks were. They'd come to practice, but no, I don't remember that personally. I could have been totally oblivious.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think a lot of people are. I mean, you got your plane, you got your blinders on, and all that. But so are you seeing any of that today? Like, do they reach out to you at all, and trying to bring you back, and
Yeah, like I
kind of.
just mentioned, this Amplify You thing that they've got going on. Um, Chris basically built that because he's like, hey, athletes have a set of skills that are very unique. You've learned how to deal with adversity. You've learned how to be self-disciplined. You know how to follow a program. You know how to push, like I mentioned, through adversity. You've learned how to work with a diverse group of people. And so there's skill sets that athletes have developed over the years. And now it's just making sure that they understand how that translates into the workforce. And if they can make that known, people are looking for athletes that have, have a decent academic level of excellence, but have these intangible qualities, because that's really what's going to make or break your organization. Does this person work hard? Are they trustworthy? Are they going the extra mile? Or is this somebody that I have to poke and prod to get the job done? I'm going to have to fire them eventually. And so you and I both know, once you get the degree, nobody ever asks for your GPA. When they
Yeah,
call references, they're asking for, what type of person is this? Are they skilled? And do they work hard? And if you can check the box, like I would say this, a lot of employers will hire for capacity, meaning do they have the potential to do something, but they also have the demonstrated ability, like they've demonstrated over time that they will work hard. I think 99% of employers will take that any day over somebody that's like, super skilled and is a total rear end and they're lazy.
Yeah.
Right? Because that doesn't fly in any sporting environment. Like lazy, like you can be like super skilled in a total rear end and there's kind of a trade-off there. Like if they're a superstar, but you're not going to have too many of those people on your team because that's a nightmare.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a good point. I mean, we talk about a lot about the athlete skill set, the athlete DNA, and yeah, it's something that employers want to hire. And we continue, especially, these athletes that are transitioning out of sport, a lot of it, they're like, okay, well, their identity is the sport. And it's like, no, you might have 30, 40 years or more ahead of you after you're done playing. And you're not just the football player, the baseball player, the runner. I mean, you're a real person. And
Absolutely.
and to your point, you've got that skill set that employers want, and that's something that we promote out as well. On Alumni Direct, we have a section in the athlete community center specific to jobs that people want to hire athletes. So that's great. And so the Amplify, is that something specifically to Texas A&M, or that's something that's
Yes.
like a broad program?
No, it's just a Texas A&M. I'm just getting involved in it right now, so I'm still learning more about the X's and O's, and they're working on having me come back in late January to do my first talk there.
Yeah, and that's important, I think, to engage the alumni athletes. I mean, I've talked to many schools, and they struggle, and some of it's just bandwidth; they don't have that. But like I always talk about how I was on a call with my university, and I had with one of our Hall of Fame athletes who played like 10 years in the NFL. It's just like, hey, tap me in, and they're kind of like, they said they struggle in that capacity, and I said the same thing. I was a runner there. It's just we want to help. And I mean, I think the schools, it's a two-way street, but I think the schools want to reach or need to reach back out to the alumni athletes and have them involved.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one other thought that just came to mind too is that there seems to be, and this will be interesting coming from your background, when you look at different sports, I'm not going to say it's silo, but you don't necessarily see, maybe a little more in college, but like the different sports interacting with each other, like the athletes interacting with each other and kind of leveraging that athletic relationship. Do you see that? Because you're, as a strength and conditioning in that area, obviously you'd be dealing with, probably with multiple sports. I mean, did you see the interaction amongst the different sports
Oh
as
yeah.
far as the?
It also has to do with facility setup. When I was a student athlete, all the athletes ate in the same dining hall. And
Okay.
so there was a lot of cross pollination, and we would go support each other. I was love to go watch soccer and support them, and volleyball, and I was also involved in FCA, and so there was a lot of that going on. So I think there's a lot of that going on. There's some sports at some universities that are just such marquee sports; they're kind of sequestered off by themselves.
Right.
I think athletes generally want to be around athletes, and so yeah, I saw a lot of that going on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to a friend the other day, and he was a runner in college, but he did talk about he went to some kind of reunion. I don't remember what reunion it was for him, but he mentioned that the athletes at the reunion were ones that tended to stick together, and it wasn't just it was across different sports, which is great. I mean, you got a lot of common, obviously. I mean, a lot of these athletes have played sports since they're little kids, and regardless of the sport, and so they can identify with that whole experience.
Absolutely.
So I always ask these questions. I got two questions to ask you. And so in 10 words or less, what advice, if you can go back in time, kind of like Back to the Future, time machine, what advice would you give to freshman Erik?
Oh man. Find what you love faster. So I don't think there's enough experimentation with what you like. I was a good student to start, and then there was a period in undergraduate where I wasn't a great student because it was just I didn't know how to manage things. And I also would have said, yeah, I would have said find what you love faster and build enduring habits. We didn't have the same level of education on certain things that now we have education on. I mean, I'll still remember like our nutrition education was like eat like a king for breakfast, a prince for lunch, and a pauper for dinner. And then it was like, we got some random stuff, and here's a here's a nasty bar to eat, and like here's some creatine that if we can't provide it, but you can go buy it here. I mean, that was like it. And there was no sleep education, none of this stuff. And now student athletes are given ample opportunity to learn how to develop these habits, but like more than that, like time management and stuff like that. So if I had learned how to manage my time and my habits better, I would have missed a lot of landmines.
Okay, now let's fast forward. What advice would have you given, or would you give to senior Erik?
Senior Erik? Oh man, stay humble. I think the biggest mistakes I made in my career, I don't know if I would call it, maybe it's humility, but it was more like I was always doing things that nobody else was doing. So like when I brought athlete tracking to the US from Australia in 2011, that just wasn't getting done. And so in order to swim upstream, sometimes you got to make a lot of noise. And then when everything flipped and that blew up, and it got adopted by the NFL, opened a multi-billion-dollar market for sports wearables, and I was kind of on the front of that. All of a sudden, when you're catapulted to the front, that's when you're going to start to realize you're going to be the first to make a lot of mistakes. So walk in the door with tons of humility, knowing that you're going to skin your knees. And I think that perspective would have been very helpful, but sometimes you just gotta walk through that, and it does create a bit more humility in the way that you handle yourself.
Yeah, that's great. That's great advice there. So let's talk about your transition out of sport. When you played football, you started talking about playing sixth grade, going all the way up through. So when that was over, I mean, obviously you're still around sports, but how was that for you?
Easy. For me, I was ready to be done.
Okay.
I was ready for the next challenge. I really wanted to become a great coach, and I was so excited about the opportunity for what was next. And then I was all in, and I was obsessed. And part of that's good. Like I wanted to learn more about speed development. So I read every single journal article, the Journal of Strength Conditioning Research ever published on speed. And I was just obsessed with learning. And so I knew that I had so far to go that I didn't care what it took. I would just go learn. I think there was almost like, I don't know, I would say like a decade of just heads down learning. And there were skill sets I wish I would have learned outside of the X's and O's, but of developing, human performance systems. But to me, it was easy.
And that's great. I mean, so and as we know, some people really struggle with it, and I think sometimes it depends on the sport. I mean, you were a football player, so typically a lot of times, especially if nose to the grindstone, a lot of these football players that have at least the professional aspirations probably aren't really thinking about it until after the fact. But to have a grand plan. I mean, I was the same way. I mean, being a runner, I got hurt my sophomore year, and for me, I wasn't going to be a professional runner. I was going to be an Olympian. So it was easy, and I kind of started building the path of what I wanted to do in the future. So, like, what advice, especially I guess from a health perspective, strength and conditioning, what advice would you give to athletes once they transition out of sport? Because obviously, it's all going to change the way they do things. They're not going to be held to practices and things like that.
Yeah, I would say now your health is more than just your physical health. You got to start focusing on, it's what enduring habits can you set in place, and from your physical, like the physical training to sleep to nutrition, because you could continue eating like you were eating and not exercise and put on a bunch of weight. Also, I think it's like you need to become you got to get real with yourself on what type of exercise and training you should continue doing. I watch these football players or athletes trans. They're still doing these athlete workouts, and like, hey, maybe that's cool, but like your body's taking a beating, right? So like maybe you do want to go compete in CrossFit. You find a lot of athletes that, maybe they start playing pickleball. I don't know. They start playing whatever game competitively. Just like have a holistic view on life. Like, this is the physical bucket. This is my friend's bucket. There's different buckets that you need to invest in to be a thriving human, and just kind of maybe you find somebody that's gone through that can help you with that process. But you need to invest in community and developing healthy relationships. You need to invest in eating well. You need to sleep. You need to physically train, etc.
Right, there you got it. So now once you transition out, so you talked about getting into sports sciences and performance counseling throughout college and professional. So talk a little bit about that and how it ultimately led you into founding your company.
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned, like, I don't know, 13 years ago, brought athlete tracking to the States. So we were the first people to ever put a tracking device on a player in game and understand. We created the first data model for what was happening in football, how far they ran, how fast they ran, accelerations, decelerations, all this stuff. And after our first season of implementing like change with it at Florida State, our team had an 88% reduction in injury. We won a championship. NFL flew in a bunch of people and they're like, what the heck's going on here? And it blew up. Like literally proliferated almost every major sport you can think of. Now it's on every NFL team is tracked in game. And so I went down the rabbit hole on how to turn data into human performance solutions. And we started doing some really cool stuff in different areas. And I wanted to figure out a way to bring this ultra personalization to anybody with a wearable device like an Apple Watch or an Aura or a Fitbit. And so that's where the idea for AIM7 started. Is not just like a data layer. It's like, tell me exactly what I need to do today to look, feel, and perform my best. Exercise, mental fitness, sleep. And how do we deliver that at scale in a very cost-effective way? And so we started building this technology. And then we decided to niche it into the sport of pickleball, which has been the fastest growing sport in America for the past 3 years. Over 50 million people have played it in the past 12 months. I know where you are. It's everywhere in South Florida. I mean, it's a $4.5 billion industry right now. There was just a report that came out that almost $900 million is needed to build enough courts to meet the demands. So
Wow.
nobody had built an app for the health and performance of these players. So we niched it into pickleball and launched it in October, and it's just been heads down ever since. It's been heads down for 3.5 years.
So what does the app help you do?
Yeah, it's everything you need to do on and off the court to perform better and prevent injuries. So ultra personalized warm-ups and cool downs based off of a whole host of information. Workouts that you can do for pickleball that adjust to your time demands. Also, we leverage all your biometric data and we adjust your training daily based off of how you're adapting to stress. Really cool IP that we developed. There's mobility training. So it's everything that you need to stay healthy and on the court. And something we're about to release. I don't know when this podcast is going to be published, but we're about to make our app freemium, and we're building these sharing features. So if people that are on court, we found that people would love to share their physical workout data around their pickleball game. So we're about to launch this in about, I don't know, 10 days to 2 weeks, where you can take a picture of you and your friends, and then we overlay all your match data, how many calories you burn, win, loss, all this kind of stuff, and you can share it on social media, and then you can use that side of the app for free. So we want to give people an opportunity to share their love of the game and what they're doing on the court with their communities.
Oh, that sounds great. And then what would be the next steps? Would it be taking it to other sports as well, or?
We're actually world class at building algorithms. So we're building a niche large language model that you could then. So if you're familiar with AI and what large language models do, we're building a large language model or an AI coach that could be stacked on any piece of hardware for any sport. So we're using pickleball as the beachhead market, but then once the LLM is built, we could license it or sell this model to other people.
That's great. Let's talk a little bit about your podcast. So talk about the Blueprint podcast.
Yeah, that's been 4 years now. If you ever listen to Andrew Huberman, I call it Huberman Light. So we distill cutting edge science, leadership, and life skills, and what I say, simple tactics. So 15 to 20 minutes, you can walk away with very practical advice for maybe it's for exercise, your mental health. Today, we just had the first of a series of podcasts with CC Kraft, who's the head of mental performance for the Philadelphia Phillies. So we talk about things like resilience, but it's all like, here's a topic, here's practical information you can get from it, so you can put it into practice now for busy people.
Okay, that's great. How long have you been doing that one for? You said 4 years, you said?
Yeah, 550 episodes.
You know what's interesting? I found out recently that somebody was talking about there's only only 5% of millions of podcasts make it past 10.
Yeah. So you and
So
I are the outliers.
yeah, kudos to you for over 500. That's great. I mean, I'm sitting about 130, so I mean, I got a long way to go to catch
Keep
up
it
to you.
up.
But yeah, I'm trying. I know my son does a baseball podcast, and I think he's coming up on like 2,000 now
Oh
because
my
he's done
gosh.
7 seasons, and it's like every day during the week, like throughout the year. So
Jeez.
you can imagine that adds up to a lot.
Wow, that's insane.
Yeah. So tell people how they can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Erik Korem, ErikKorem. If you're interested in AIM7, it's AIM7.com. We're on Instagram at AIM7PB as in pickleball. And if the podcast sounds interesting, it's The Blueprint, and it's on Apple and Spotify. And yeah, I just if I can ever be of service, just let me know. Just DM me, or I answer everything.
That's awesome, man. I'm sure yeah, we could speak for hours on all these different topics. I mean, this is great stuff, and you can find us at alumnidirect.com. This podcast, Athletes Entrepreneurs Alumni Journey, is on the our YouTube channel, as well as across all the podcast networks. And, we really want people to just find it and listen to it, because I think there's so much. And every episode I say the nuggets, but there's so many great nuggets like Erik provided today that can really help these athletes. It is a major issue, and we want to make a positive impact on helping these athletes realize that there is life after sports, and there's a lot more that they can do. So, Erik, thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.